All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here today. We appreciate your attendance. I'm Alan Knight, and by virtue of elimination, this is
Randy Lewis.
So we appreciate you. No. Oh. So we're glad to have you. I know quite a few of you, and some of you I don't. So we both teach in the business school. Dr. Lewis teaches in finance, and I teach marketing, and what else do I do? I don't know. We'll just leave it marketing and some leadership stuff. So today, before we get started, if you feel like you don't want to raise your hand after both of our presentations, you might want to write down this URL. And if you go to a browser and type that in, you should see this presentation, and you can type in a question. And at the end of both of our presentations, I'll be reviewing the questions, and if there are any that we think are pertinent or impertinent that we'd like to share with you, we'll do that. So, when Randy and I got together and talked about the topic for this year, one of the things that we really wanted to consider is we think we're comfortable with the fact that we think that the U.S. and America particularly is a place where there is freedom of choice and freedom of occupation, and ultimately we have spiritual and economic prosperity. So one of the things I wanted to show you that I think is encouraging, so this is kind of a positive talk. Hopefully what we'll take away today from some of the positive things we'll talk about is what principles, what practices can we take going forward that will help us make America even a better place and ultimately the world a better place, okay? One of the things I want to know, if you look at a scale and the index being 100 back in 1990, and you take these 5 categories, child mortality, hunger, illiteracy, pollution, poverty, what do you see? You see a decline in all those 5 indicators globally. Interesting enough, the poverty at scale at 100 in 1990, it's at around 25 today. So there's been a 3/4 improvement. The opposite of that is a decline in poverty worldwide since 1990 to 2016. That's kind of a positive thing to consider. Now, why is some of that? Well, because the globe is such a big place, and this is America the Beautiful, we thought we'd start on something about a term that maybe you haven't heard of. Sometimes it's used incorrectly, and that's called American exceptionalism. What are the unique characteristics? Are there unique characteristics historically that have helped both positive outcomes and some negative outcomes in the U.S.? People use this term in mistaken ways. Some would say, well, it's just wonderful. American exceptionalism is wonderful. I think that tends to be a little egotistical. Some people say, oh, America has a special mission in the world. You know, we need to heal and take care of the whole world. We're always right. Well, that's not what American exceptionalism is about. Some people would say, oh, American exceptionalism is just about imperialism. You may remember from history, you know, you can think of England and Spain, especially in the West, and England throughout the world, you know, had colonies, okay? But that's not what we're talking about. Or a term, I don't know if you've heard of this, jingoism, which says the patriotism elicits aggressive or warlike qualities. That's what American exceptionalism means. Or chauvinism, you've probably heard it in context of male chauvinism, but chauvinism is an irrational belief in the superiority of one's own group. All these things are incorrect views of exceptionalism, okay? So, historically, if we go back to 1776 and look forward about 50 years, the concept of America being kind of a unique place was held by several historians and visitors to the country who said, okay, it doesn't really mean that America is superior or excellent. It's just got things that are different. And it's not a fact, or it is a fact, I should say. So it's not as much an opinion as it is a fact of some of these things. We'll talk about these qualities. So these 4 or 5 people, and there's others, wrote about American exceptionalism back again in the early 1800s through mid-1800s. What do they mean is they all agreed on one thing. The U.S. was quite unlike other nations that they'd ever seen. So why is that? We think there are some elements then that speak to that. You've probably heard of words like liberty, egalitarianism, individualism, republicanism, laissez-faire economics, and so forth. But there are four main areas. One is an exceptional setting. America was located, certainly in the night, still located in the same place it's been for quite a while, but before it's called America, right? What was unusual? The location. Right? We were, as a landmass, we're kind of isolated, right? Had the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Pacific Ocean on another one. That was kind of unusual in time and place in the 1700s. And so remember, we're going to be talking about context and culture and how it developed. The other issue is typically we've had peaceable neighbors. I'm trying to remember the last time Canada, anybody from Canada in here? When was the last time Canada invaded the U.S. or the U.S. invaded Canada? You need to look that up. It's been a while. Likewise in Mexico, there was a couple of skirmishes. You may remember the 1848 war if you like history. The other thing that was unique in the U.S. was the idea of frontier. Right? There were peoples that were living right throughout what we would consider the 48 states today in this landmass, but it was sparsely populated. There was a lot of just open areas. So, okay, think of this as part of the setting and the context. Then, number two is there was an exceptional ideology. That is, the people who came here began to emerge and followed some philosophy and thinking that human beings, that is, individuals, each one of you possess, right, certain natural rights, that nobody should be allowed to take those rights away from you. Again, this idea of aspiring to happiness, you may recall hearing that word somewhere. Check out your history. But the word happiness means living well and doing well. It doesn't mean I'm ha-ha, hee-hee, ho-ho happy. That's okay too. And then thirdly, under ideology, is this idea of human potential. That each individual has potential and worth and should be allowed in an environment to be able to explore and utilize and grow with that potential. Now, remember, I'm thinking these are ideas. And one thing I don't want you to think here is I certainly am not saying in any way, shape, or form as we go through the next two that these things were dealt with perfectly. That's not what I'm saying. But we're talking about building a way of thinking about America and what it was doing. Here's some exceptional traits. Civic culture in the U.S. Grew out of four areas. Okay, industriousness. I think you kind of know what industriousness means. I'll give you some descriptors. Egalitarianism, religiosity, and community. Right? The basis for our civic culture. Now, industriousness suggested, again, we're talking about in the 19th century, this idea of self-reliance. Okay, hard work, working hard, and by that we have the possibility of getting ahead. And how did we see that carry itself out in the starting? Anybody think of Ellis Island and immigrants coming over to the United States? The possibility, if I just work hard, I might be able to get ahead. And then this idea of egalitarianism. And I think the important element here is equality of human dignity. Okay, not of outcomes, but equality of human dignity. I think we all see this in the classroom, right? We don't all have the same strengths. While I wished everybody could be a marketing major, some of you don't like marketing, and you want to do something like, what is it you teach, finance? Finance, because that's an area of strength for you, okay? Or maybe religion or sociology. We got a couple of faculty members back there, right? So this idea, though, each person, though, has dignity and value, okay? I want to show you an example of some of the outcomes. This is a chart that demonstrates, for instance, this idea, these two ideas, I think, encapsulates them, is where U.S. incomes are, and these are at parity levels, so that means purchasing power parities, okay? 88% of Americans are at upper middle or high income compared to the rest of the world. You see how that chart explains itself there, okay? Thought this was an interesting chart. This chart compares the percent of personal income that was spent on basics. So basics would be like what? Food, shelter, clothing, right? Maybe utilities. So this looks like maybe the Depression right here, huh? 56%, probably about 1933 or 4. We go fast forward to 2016, and it's a little bit below 32%. Now, for some of you who've had economics with Professor Britton, what would that suggest? If in 1933 I spent 56 cents of every dollar on basics, what's 1 minus 56? 44 cents, right, to spend on something else, right? Disposable income that we can spend on something else. What? How much is that now, today? What's 1 minus 30? I know that math gets hard, even in marketing, right? 100 minus 30 is 70. Now we have 70 cents. So we've actually improved, right, on money that we have to, as Randy said earlier, buy our iPhones. Is that what you said? So think about that, right? Now, if we go to these other two things, religiosity and community life, the idea that, and this primarily stems from a sense of our Christian heritage. And I should say that the founders of the U.S. were not what you might consider to be Christians, probably the way you grew up. If you grew up in a Christian home, you went to church every Sunday, and how you view Christ and God's interaction in the world. Many of them were deists. Many of them were just so-so Christians. But they knew there was value in religious sentiment because it helped set up boundaries and moral guidelines. So, which led to, okay, being concerned about others, okay, social activism. Aspiring that we can make the country better, we can make our community better. When I say country, I'm also talking about community. And the fact that then we, because of our religiosity, say, okay, we need to be self-governing, right? We have a moral outline how we should live. And likewise, then, the last or fourth element, of our traits were community life, civic engagement. Okay, we need to be a part of our community. Our voices need to be heard. We need to hear other voices. We need to decide, which led to neighborliness. And then this idea of trust. Trust is so important, and I don't think you can get trust if you don't have civic engagement and neighborliness. So I even remember, you won't remember because haven't been around here as long as I have, when you could take a walk and you'd see people out on their porch and you could talk to them, as you're walking by in your neighborhood. Does anybody have that kind of experience growing up? Very few, okay. One of the things about our religiosity and community, I wanted to show you, this is also scaled, so as you're looking at the same, this is charitable donations after adjustment for inflation in the U.S. giving. So what's the outcome of some of that, all right? Typically, it was $333 per capita. And remember, these are same dollars, so the inflation has been taken out of this. To 2016, what was $1,204. So that's a fourfold increase, right, in charitable giving. Total giving has gone up, what, 6 times? Roughly, is that right? 7 times, 7.5 times? And then I thought this was an interesting graph to see what's been the influence of this idea of religiosity and community, how important our religious background, all right, is the darker gray is giving by persons who attend at least 27 plus religious services a year. And what do you see there? Okay, they give more to secular causes. They have a higher average amount to secular causes. But of course, that makes sense. Percent who give to religious causes, average amount given to religious causes, and total annual charitable giving. So you see religiosity impacts who we are as a culture. And then finally, fourth leg of this is the idea of rule of law, that, again, in theory and culturally, everyone is supposed to become before the law. And you've seen Lady Justice, right, holding the scale. Is she wearing sunglasses? What is she wearing over her eyes? Anybody know? Her eyes are covered, right? Why is that? Because Lady Justice is supposed to be blind to who you are, right? The scales are balanced on the basis of this idea of rule of law. And then this idea of free markets. And you've heard, those of you in my classroom, you know what we talk about is the fact that it starts out with any two people. I have something that you want, and you have something that I want. How do we figure out what a fair exchange is so we both end up better off? And then extrapolate that up. And then this idea of classical liberalism. So just to recap, I think some of the takeaways from this morning is, okay, what hopefully we've drawn and what we can still do today is, first of all, go back, and we've got some handouts at the end that list these things for you. Participation. I think it's easy in today's world to think, even with social media and so forth, that we're really participating, but we're actively involved in our local communities, and I know many, many of you are. Are we using critical thinking to evaluate what we see and hear on the news against some of these values and that help develop this culture of America? What do we think about immigration? You know, one of the great things I think about America historically, and I guess you can't use the term melting pot anymore, but when I was growing up, we used that because we said, and again, history has got ups and downs, but what I learned in school was people are welcome to come to the country. We have benefited greatly from multiple cultures, multiple individuals coming from small communities, contributing, and it's been a blessing for America and its culture. Also, the idea of, you know, the free trade and free markets, and then to encourage this different view that what we're saying about exceptionalism is not that we're better than, but we've had, and I think been blessed with some opportunities and some resources that some others haven't. So how are we going to handle that? How are we going to be responsible and be good stewards for that? And then ultimately a global view. I mean, are we going to be participants in the world? I think it starts from our heart, and it goes next to our community, and then into the world. So, Randy?
Yes.
I'm all done. Thank you. Let me get you changed.
Yep. All right, so we have 5% of the world's population, and so it's 1/20th of the world's population, but yet we have GDP, our total of our goods and services produced in the United States is about $19 trillion, and that's about 20% of the world's production of goods and services, with 325 million people. We have the highest household spending in the world, a third of the global household spending. Now, you might say that's a bad thing, we're spending too much, but maybe that's what we wanted. You know, I mean, I want an iPhone. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I like iPhones. We have free trade agreements with 20 countries that provide access to hundreds of millions of consumers. Second thing, innovation. We're going to get back to this in a little bit, but entrepreneurs, unbelievable number of entrepreneurs in this country. Let's start with R&D. We're leader in R&D in the world. We have the greatest number of registered international patents, We have an amazing, robust international or intellectual property protection framework that is nurtured at the nation's leading universities and incubators all throughout the world. We have an ecosystem for innovation and inspiration that is second to none. 14% of our working population are entrepreneurs, and in total is about 30 million people. That's a lot. I will show you a comparison to the rest of the world, and you will be shocked. And so I really do believe that that is the basis for our American exceptionalism, the last slide. But some of these other things are important too. Ease of doing business. You know, when you do business in the world, you have to make it easy for people to do business. So we're highly ranked internationally for overall competitiveness and ease of doing business. We have a regulatory environment that is not too much, not too little. We have reduced our regulation in the last 12 months. And we have a business culture that encourages free enterprise and competition. We have a stable democracy and a predictable legal system that you don't have to worry about, you know, if I start business here, is it going to fail? Because of the government or because of regulations. We have a dynamic workforce. Now, a lot of people talk about education and how, you know, our elementary and secondary education is not great. We have really the best higher education system in the world. In fact, it's so good that they have to turn away many, many international students at Michigan State University in particular. And the number of Chinese students has increased by like tenfold in the last 5 or 10 years. So we have a dynamic workforce, diverse, skilled, innovative, and very mobile. We have the highest productivity rate in the world. Productivity means that the number of inputs you put in compared to the number of outputs that you produce. So we have the highest productivity rate among populations of 5 million or greater. We were the highest in the world in all populations up until a few years ago. But I think Finland would take number one, or we would take number one. We would kind of go back and forth. But we have the highest productivity rate among populations over 5 million. We have 325 million. We have, I mentioned this earlier, but we collaborate with private and public sectors to have a workforce that is 21st century ready. The next thing is abundant resources. This is probably one of our real strong suits that makes American exceptionalism what it is. Third largest nation by geography. We have amazing, abundant natural resources. We're the largest producer of natural gas and oil in the world. And that's more than Saudi Arabia and Russia. We have we're connected by an expansive infrastructure, and I know we're working on infrastructure. We're going to put quite a bit of money into infrastructure in the next few years. But this infrastructure goes from, you know, internet connections to roads to bridges, and every amazing, you know, an amazing infrastructure that's second to none. This is the natural gas production for America. The blue would be America, and the next one over would be Russia, the orange, and then the kind of reddish or burgundy would be Saudi Arabia. And you can see in 2016, I don't have the 2017 numbers, we have the highest amount of petroleum production, and if you take that bar compared to these bars, we have the highest production of natural gas in the world. And we're only 5% of the population. So think about that for a moment. We're the third largest geographically, but we're only 5% of the population. We produce the most natural gas and oil in the world. Access to capital. Maybe this is our strongest suit. I keep thinking that the last one was our strongest suit, but this is really probably our strongest suit. If you think about the financial or access to capital, this is what I teach, essentially. So I talk about this practically every week. And we have the most developed, liquid, flexible, efficient financial system in the world. The financial system for any country are the veins, like veins to a body. They go throughout the body and provide blood flow to the body, just like the financial system provides financial markets or financial resources to businesses, individuals, governments. We have amazing funding sources like banks, investment firms, venture capitalists, angel investors, the best in the world by far. We have the largest market cap. Market cap is the total value of a stock market, by the way. You take the stock price times the number of shares. We have the our market cap at the NYSE is $18 trillion. The next highest is the NASDAQ. Those are both American markets. That's $7 trillion. The next highest is under $4 trillion. That's Tokyo. The next highest is Shanghai at about $3.5 trillion. Think about that for a moment. New York, 18 trillion. New York Stock Exchange, 17 trillion, I mean. And the next highest outside of the United States is 3.5 to 4 trillion. I mean, it's an amazing, it's just absolutely amazing. Our currency, the US dollar, is the reserve currency of the world. And that's not about to change anytime soon. All right, so why are we exceptional? What makes us exceptional? Is it religion? You see that we have, of all the religions, Christianity has 2.2 billion, Islam is 1.6 billion, Hinduism 1.1 billion, and then so on and so forth. And they're all smaller if you go down that. So I don't know if I have, do I have time to show this video?
No, I can't.
So,
How long is
it's
it? You want to show it?
5 minutes? 5
Show
minutes?
it.
I think so. I mean, before you show it, I want to just mention a couple of things. So, is it possibly Protestant religion, Protestant versus, say, Catholic, or Islam, that is the driving force behind American exceptionalism? I know that Alan talked about sort of history, and I'm talking about current day, modern day. But I thought it would be interesting to look back and say, what is the reason, what is the basis, what is the framework for our American exceptionalism? And Max Weber kind of talked about this. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, just so you know. But I thought it'd be interesting just to see this real quick video and just kind of get an idea of what he was kind of talking about here.
Max Weber is one of the philosophers best able to explain to us the peculiar economic system we live within, called capitalism. Born in Erfurt in Germany in 1864, Weber grew up to see his country convulsed by the dramatic changes of the Industrial Revolution. Cities were exploding in size, vast companies were forming, a new managerial elite was replacing the old aristocracy. Weber spent his life analysing these changes, and he developed some key ideas with which we can better understand the workings and future of capitalism. The standard view is that capitalism began as a result of developments in technology, especially steam power. But Weber proposed something more interesting, that what actually made capitalism possible was a set of ideas, and in particular, religious ideas. And not just any religious ideas. Capitalism was created by Protestantism, specifically Calvinism. In his great work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1905, Weber laid out some of the reasons why he believed Protestant Christianity had been so crucial to capitalism. In Weber's analysis, Catholics have it relatively easy. They're able to confess their transgressions at regular intervals and can be cleansed by priests. But no such purifications are available to Protestants, who believe that only God is able to forgive anyone, and he won't make his intentions known until the day of judgment. Until then, Weber alleged, Protestants are left with heightened feelings of anxiety, as well as lifelong guilty desires to prove their virtue to a severe, all-seeing, but silent God. In Weber's eyes, Protestant feelings of guilt were diverted into an obsession with hard work. This was what he called the Protestant work ethic. The sins of Adam could only be expunged through constant toil. Not coincidentally, there were far fewer festivals and days of rest in Protestantism. God didn't like time off. Catholics had limited their conception of holy work to the activities of priests, monks and nuns. But now, Protestants declared that work of any kind could be done in the name of God, even jobs like being a baker or an accountant. This lent new moral energy and earnestness to all branches of professional life. In Catholic countries, the family was, and often still is, everything. But Protestants took a less benevolent view of family. The family could be a haven for selfish and egoistic motives. For early Protestants, one was meant to direct one's selfless energies to the community as a whole, the public realm where everyone deserved fairness and dignity. Protestantism and eventually scientific capitalism turned its back on miracles. Weber called this the disenchantment of the world. So prosperity wasn't to be thought of as something mysteriously ordained by God. It could only be the result of thinking methodically, acting honestly, and working industriously and sensibly over many years. Without a belief in miracles, people turned to science for explanations and changes, which encouraged scientific investigation and discovery, and eventually technological booms. Taken together, these 5 factors created in Weber's eyes the crucial catalytic ingredients for capitalism to take hold. Marx had argued that religion was the opium of the masses, a drug that induced passive acceptance of the horrors of capitalism. But Weber turned this dictum on its head. People didn't tolerate capitalism because of religion, they only became capitalists as a result of their religion. There are about 35 countries where capitalism is now well developed.
I work for Jacques.
So if you were to look at the globe, you're looking at a map of the globe, and you can see where, say, Protestants typically, or Catholics would be familiar, Protestants. You can see that many parts of the world, there's a direct correlation between Protestant religion and those economies that tend to be most robust in the world. You look at that map. So the one thing I wanted to leave you with was that we have, and I mentioned this earlier about entrepreneurs. These are actually owners of businesses aged 3 months to 3.5 years who have opened a business by choice. These are called new entrepreneurs. And as you can see, the United States has about 7.5% of the working population classified as new entrepreneurs, as opposed to, say, Germany, that has 2.5% of its working population that are classified as new entrepreneurs. So you can see we're off the charts. The only one that's close is the Netherlands. Britain is 3.75%. And so these numbers along this vertical here are venture capital investments as a percentage of GDP. So we put in venture capitalists, that means new emerging businesses, 0.17% of our GDP into investment into those types of businesses. Whereas you can see the others are, 0.03, 0.04, 0.05 is Sweden, that's the next highest. We're way, much higher than any of these top other countries that would be considered industrialist countries. The study that was done in Forbes not so long ago indicated that this is about attitude, really. How do our entrepreneurs feel about their country and about their companies? And it was a question about, so this is the percentage of entrepreneurs that believe that their country or their companies within their country have a competitive advantage. So why is that important? Because if you don't believe that, you're probably not going to want to start a business. But if you do believe that, you probably will, and you'll want to take that risk. So if we look at the Middle East, the Europeans, the Asians, and Americans, you can see that Middle East, only 18% of entrepreneurs feel that their country has a competitive advantage. And only 4% of Middle Easterners think that their companies have a competitive advantage, as opposed to, you can see Europeans are 35 and 59, Asians are closer to us, actually, 66 and 68, but Americans are by far the highest percentage in terms of those that are confident in their companies and their countries that they will have a competitive advantage if they were to do business in that country. So 76% of Americans think that our country has a competitive advantage, and 72% of Americans think that our companies have a competitive advantage. So attitude drives entrepreneurship, attitude drives new businesses, and you can see from our investment and from the attitudes of Americans that that's one of the major reasons why for American exceptionalism. So in conclusion, the U.S. has the largest economy, the best financial system, the most innovative entrepreneurs, the best laws for business expansion, excellent workforce, abundant resources, access to capital, an excellent combination of religion and ethics. And you don't have to believe me to know that, because Charles Hill, in all of his textbooks, he talks about the Protestant religion being the one religion that actually promotes capitalism and entrepreneurship. And then the business confidence, or business attitude about risk-taking, about entrepreneurship. Let's see, I think that's it. I love that cat. It's over, it says. Got a smile, by the way. That's a smile.
Randy, I guess we got a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, there was one question posted on that URL I gave you, and posted by an anonymous. I'll give the answer first. The answer, whoever put that in there, is stress.
What was the question?
Yeah, the question was, how in the world can they get flowing silver hair like this? It's stress working with college students. That's the answer. So, I don't know, does anybody have any questions or comments? I don't know if we buffaloed them or baffled them.